All right, let's jump into this deep dive. Today, it's all about inclusive communication. It's everywhere these days. We're looking at a French article called Inclusive Communication Between Societal Necessity and Risk of Backlash. And I think it's going to be super interesting to see how this whole thing is playing out, globally.
Yeah, for sure. It's not just a France thing. It's definitely hitting the global stage.
Totally. So the article kicks off by saying that inclusive communication is kind of like walking a tightrope.
Yeah,
Like it's this delicate balance, right? It's not just about like not saying the wrong thing. It's about really understanding and respecting all those different backgrounds and identities. It's a lot more nuanced than just being politically correct, which I think a lot of people still assume it
it's
is.
definitely evolved, hasn't it? Like the whole landscape has shifted. It used to be all about avoiding offense. Now it's about genuinely reflecting the world we live in.
And the article does a great job of explaining why this shift is happening. It points to three major factors driving the change. The first one, societal pressure, totally makes sense. Movements like hashtag #MeToo and Black Lives Matter have really put the spotlight on issues of inequality and representation.
They've been catalysts, for sure. And they've definitely empowered consumers to hold brands accountable in a way we haven't seen before. Like, it's not enough to just sell a product anymore. People really care about a company's values, how they treat their employees, their customers, and the wider community.
Like they're voting with their wallets, right? They're choosing to support brands that align with their values.
Exactly. And that brings us to the second factor the article highlights, changing demographics. As society becomes more diverse, brands are feeling the pressure to reflect that diversity in their messaging, which totally makes sense. If you want to connect with a wider audience, your communication needs to resonate with a wider range of experiences.
So it's not just about being ethically responsible, it's also about being smart from a business perspective.
Absolutely. There's a really interesting study the article cites that found companies with more diverse leadership teams are more likely to have above average profitability.
Okay, that's huge. It really shows that inclusive communication isn't just a nice to have, it can actually impact the bottom line.
And that's where the aha moment happens for a lot of companies,
Mhm.
when they realize that embracing diversity can actually make them more successful.
It's win-win, right, for both the company and the communities they're trying to reach.
Right.
But, and this is where the title of the article comes in, there are definitely risks involved. The article lays out some of the challenges businesses face when trying to implement these changes. And one that really jumped out at me was the need for training. It's not as simple as just telling your team, hey, be more inclusive. It takes real effort to understand those nuances we were talking about earlier.
Training is key, for
Right.
sure. It's not just about avoiding offensive language either. It's about understanding unconscious bias, recognizing microaggressions, all those subtle forms of exclusion that can fly under the radar.
Because it's easy to mess up if you're not aware of those things.
Totally. And the article even gives examples of well-intentioned campaigns that backfired because they missed the mark on cultural sensitivity. Like they were trying to do the right thing, but ended up doing more harm than good.
And that leads us to another big point the article makes. Authenticity, inclusive communication can't just be this superficial layer of like woke language. It has to be rooted in the company's actual values. Like their actions need to match their words.
It's got to be genuine, not just a marketing tactic.
Otherwise, it just comes across as inauthentic. Like they're just trying to capitalize on a trend without making any real changes, which I think we've all seen examples of brands getting called out for that kind of woke washing,
Oh,
right?
yeah, all the time.
Like consumers are smart. They can see right through that.
And the article really digs into how damaging that can be. Because when consumers feel like they're being manipulated or misled, they lose trust in the brand. And that's really hard to recover from.
So authenticity is key, but the article also emphasizes consistency. Like this can't be a one-off thing. It needs to be woven into the fabric of the organization,
Yeah, it has to be part of their DNA.
both internally and externally.
Absolutely. If
Gotcha.
a company's preaching inclusion in their marketing, but their internal culture is a nightmare, people will figure it out. And it just undermines everything they're trying to do.
Like the article talks about how inclusive communication should be present in everything, from employee training and internal memos to how they're handling customer service on social media.
It's about creating a culture where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected, regardless of their background,
Right.
which is a beautiful goal, but definitely not without its challenges.
Definitely not.
The article highlights some potential pitfalls, and one of the biggest is resistance to change. Some individuals may feel threatened or excluded by these new approaches, and that can lead to pushback and even hostility.
It's tough, right? It's a topic that can trigger strong
Yeah,
emotions.
it's very nuanced.
And then on top of that, there are the political landmines that the article talks about. Like, in our current climate, even well-intentioned inclusive initiatives can be misconstrued as political statements, which can lead to controversy and alienate certain segments of the
So
audience.
it's a delicate balancing act, and it requires organizations to be thoughtful and strategic in their approach. Like they need to be prepared to have those tough conversations, to address concerns head on, and to stay true to their values, even when it's difficult.
It's like a constant learning process, right? Figuring out how to navigate these complexities and stay committed to inclusive communication,
Totally.
even when it gets tough, which it inevitably will.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
Definitely not.
But the article doesn't just leave us hanging with these challenges. It actually offers some pretty practical advice for organizations that are trying to do this right. And that's what we're going to dive into next.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
It's almost like a test of leadership, isn't it? To
Yeah.
really walk the walk when it comes to this stuff.
For sure. It takes courage and commitment.
So let's get practical. The article actually gives some advice for organizations wanting to do this right. Where do they even start?
Well, the article suggests starting with an audit.
Yeah.
Like really taking stock of your current communications.
Okay, so like looking at everything, right? Website, marketing materials, internal stuff too.
Everything. Employee handbooks, internal memos, the whole shebang.
Got it. So you're basically checking to see if your communications actually reflect the diverse world we live in.
Exactly. It's about identifying those gaps and figuring out where you need to make changes.
And once you've done that, what's next? What does the article say?
Well, training is a big one. And not just a one-time thing, but ongoing education. Like language is always evolving, sensitivities are changing. So you got to keep up.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's not like you learn it once and you're good to go.
Exactly. It's a continuous process. And the article also talks about creating a culture of feedback where people feel comfortable speaking up if they see something that could be improved.
Oh, that's so important. Because even with the best intentions, mistakes are going to happen, right?
All the time. And it's about learning from those mistakes and doing better next time.
Which kind of goes back to that idea of inclusive communication being a journey, not a destination.
Yeah, it's not about being perfect. It's about being willing to learn and grow.
And one thing that really stood out to me was the idea of involving the communities you're trying to reach in the process.
Right, like collaborating with them.
Yeah, exactly. Not just talking at them, but actually having a dialogue, listening to their perspectives.
That's huge. It shows you're genuinely committed to getting it right.
And it probably helps to avoid those missteps we were talking about, right? Those unintentional blunders that can happen when you're not fully aware of different cultural nuances.
Oh, absolutely. It builds trust and authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
When you're working together with the communities you're trying to reach, you're less likely to make those kinds of mistakes.
Okay, so you've got training, authenticity, collaboration. Anything else that the article highlights as being crucial for getting this right?
Well, transparency is another big one. The article emphasizes that organizations need to be upfront about their motivations and actions.
So, like, no hiding behind vague statements or corporate jargon.
Exactly. It's about being clear and concise about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Which makes sense because consumers are savvy. They can smell BS a mile away.
And if they sense that you're not being genuine, they're going to lose trust. And that's a hard thing to win back.
So transparency is key. And then on top of that, the article even suggests that organizations should measure their progress and share their results publicly.
Like holding themselves accountable.
Exactly. It's about showing that you're serious about this, that you're not just paying lip service.
And that you're willing to be transparent about the journey, even the bumps along the way.
It's like you're inviting people to come along for the ride, to see the progress you're making and hold you accountable.
Exactly. And that level of transparency can be really powerful. It builds trust and credibility, and it shows that you're genuinely committed to making a difference.
It's inspiring in a way. Like, it's not about pretending to be perfect. It's about being open to learning and growing.
It's about progress, not perfection.
And you know what? It's amazing to see how far this whole conversation has come from simply avoiding offensive language to actually creating a more equitable and welcoming environment for everyone.
It's a reflection of how much society has changed and how much progress we've made.
And the article really nails it with this question towards the end. It asks, where do you see this balance between progress and caution, boldness and sensitivity playing out in the world around you? Like, it's inviting us to become more aware of how inclusive communication is showing up in our everyday lives.
It's like a call to action. It's
Yeah.
asking us to pay attention, to observe, and to analyze how these concepts are being put into practice, both successfully and unsuccessfully.
Because it's one thing to talk about it in theory, but it's another thing to see how it's actually playing out in the real world, right?
Totally. And that's where the real learning happens. When we start to see those real-world examples, we can begin to understand the nuances of inclusive communication
Yeah.
and develop our own perspectives on how to do it effectively.
It's like the article is giving us homework, but the fun kind, where you get to be a detective and observe the world around you.
I love that analogy. It's about becoming more conscious consumers of communication, paying
Yeah.
attention to the messages we're receiving and the values that are being communicated.
And maybe even be inspired to do something ourselves. Like even small actions can make a difference, right?
Oh, totally. Like, what if we all started calling out microaggressions when we see them?
Mm.
Or made an effort to support brands that are actually walking the walk?
Yeah, exactly. Like putting our money where our mouth is. I feel like those everyday choices can really add up.
Absolutely. And it's not just about individual actions either. We can advocate for more inclusive policies within our workplaces and communities. Like, we can all play a part in creating a more equitable world, right?
It's almost like the article is challenging us to be more conscious in all aspects of our lives, not just as consumers, but as citizens too.
Right. It's about recognizing the power we have to shape the world around us.
Yeah.
And that starts with being more aware of the messages and values that are being communicated to us.
And asking ourselves those critical questions, like who's being represented here? Whose voices are being amplified? Are there any hidden biases or stereotypes at play?
Exactly. It's about looking beyond the surface and really analyzing what's being said and how it's being said.
And once we start recognizing those patterns, we can make more informed choices
Mm-hmm.
about where we spend our money, who we support, and what kind of world we want to create.
Because inclusive communication is more than just a trend. It's a fundamental shift in the way we interact with each other and build a more just and equitable society for everyone.
Totally. And you know what? This whole conversation keeps coming back to that idea that inclusive communication isn't a destination, it's a journey.
Yeah, and there's no finish line, is there? It's an ongoing process of learning and growth.
And there will definitely be stumbles and setbacks along the way. It's not always going to be easy or comfortable.
For sure. But the important thing is to stay committed to the process,
Mm.
to keep learning, to stay engaged, and to never give up on striving for a more inclusive world.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive into inclusive communication, let's leave our listener with one final thought. It's a journey, not a destination, and we all have a role to play in shaping a more inclusive future for everyone.
A future where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected, regardless of their background or identity.
Absolutely. And hey, if you ever come across any awesome examples of inclusive communication out in the wild, or even some epic fails, share them with us. We're always up for diving deeper into this topic. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay inclusive.